All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to a new friend of mine. Today I'm talking to Michael Buckingham. He is the Vice President of Marketing at Vanderbloemen. And if you're not familiar with Vanderbloemen, they're a great company. We'll talk about them here in just a second. But Michael, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, great to be here. Excited for this conversation.
Yeah, we were just chatting, Michael, and I feel we've been kind of in similar roles over the past several years. So I've
Yep.
known who you are. I've seen your face. I've heard you speak before. You probably get this all the time, but you've got the best stash in the business. You got a legendary mustache.
As long as I have a good mustache, I'm good to go. Everything else
It's awesome. Crazy. So if you're listening to the podcast, you need to hop over to Facebook or YouTube and check out the video because you're missing out if you don't get to see Michael today. So Michael, you've done a lot of different kind of church work over the years, a lot in the kind of creative space. Now you're at Vanderbloemen. If people aren't really familiar, can you tell us what is Vanderbloemen? What do you do there?
At the very simplest terms, we help organizations. It started off with churches, but now we're working with Christian schools, Christian nonprofits, and even for-profits that have a heart for Jesus, find their staff, specifically more executive staff. So we're placing senior pastors, executive pastors, worship pastors, children's pastors, creative pastors, and really helping those teams be whole. Because when you're not whole, it gets in front of what God's called you to do. You got to have the right people on the right bus, on the right seats, and that's what we help people do.
Yeah, awesome, very cool. So we really kind of officially met a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago now at that church conference. You were one of the speakers there. Your talk is one of my favorites, and I kind of snagged you afterwards and was like, hey, I'd love for you to share that with our audience. So you talked about, it's kind of one of these buzzwords a lot of us are hearing these days, the Great Resignation. Post-COVID, it seems like it's almost impossible to find good people. I'm trying to do some work in my house and I can't find anybody to help me with anything. Right. And I know that's just common for like all the industry. Like there's help wanted signs everywhere. So and so I know it's a real thing, but I know there's also some kind of misconceptions about, what kicked this thing off or how bad is it? From your research and experience, what are you seeing as far as that, especially in the church world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing. It is definitely a real thing. I think some of it comes from burnout. I mean, this was hard. This was hard for everyone. I think especially as a church, where the church, kind of at the center of the church, it is a meeting place to come together, worship God, learn about God, be together. And that, in a blink of an eye, all went away. Yeah. And yet there's still a calling. And yet that pastor still is trying to connect. And so we're trying to shift and the word, how we've heard how many times, pivot. But that was hard. So I think for some it was like, and maybe it was already hard because it's hard to be a pastor. Yeah. We get more resignations to say, hey, I need to talk about succession on Mondays more than any other day. Sunday was hard. Maybe people didn't like that scripture. I don't think that's true or whatever. Yeah. So I think it kind of compounded that. And I also think people are like, hey, maybe now's the time to do this thing. I used to think part of the Great Resignation today is because organizations, churches are saying, okay, COVID simmered down a little bit, let's come back into the office. And people are like, no, I really like this situation. I don't want to commute. I like having lunch with my spouse, all those types of things. But I also think, and I talked about it at that church, there's also just the great, I'm not even applying for any jobs because I don't want a job. I want my own thing. I want my own, I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be an influencer. I'm going to be whatever it is. And I think some of this are people chasing their dreams a little bit, which could be a fantastic thing for them, but it is definitely a hard thing for organizations. That's why at Vanderbloemen, we're blessed with having a huge network we're all connected. So while some people are stepping away, then we can help them step into something new and possibly at your church or school organization.
Yeah. One thing that you said at the conference, which I think I've heard this elsewhere too, is that COVID didn't necessarily cause the Great Resignation, but it just kind of spurred it on, or maybe just kind of exposed some things that were already there. So what were some of the kind of underlying things coming in like 17, 18, 19 that were kind of leading to this? Do you have any insight there?
I don't know. Again, I think some of it is just general burnout, people are getting tired. I think the church is getting hit pretty hard. And I mean, you see even churches, there's divisions within denominations themselves. So I think that's some of it as well. But I do think you're right. I think COVID was not a creator of things. I think COVID was an accelerator of things. So resignations, online church. I mean, look at how many churches are now online.
Yeah.
There is, matter of fact, a friend of mine, Montel Jordan, is about to start a church, and it's only going to be online. I mean, we're seeing crazy things like that we never would have seen, I don't think, if COVID hadn't accelerated that out.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned the whole kind of gig economy thing where people are kind of wanting more flexible schedule, working from home, whatever that might look like. So what do you think? Is that something, are you kind of concerned about that for the church, or do you feel like churches can be equally successful if they kind of switch to that model? Or if things are headed that way, what are some kind of pros and cons that you forecast down the road?
Yeah, I think at the core of the church is community, right? And it's being together. But I think the church is going to have to embrace that word being, to not necessarily always being in the room. Now, I love being in the room, and I think that's huge when we can be in the room and together and worship. I mean, to be honest with you, I enjoy online church preaching. Worship, it's just not even close to being the same. The preaching is pretty spot on. I can, whether I'm listening to you on my computer or my or live, but worship is a different thing. So I think one of the things you're going to see is, okay, what do we do with that? Do we manipulate the service? Maybe online has different type of worship and cut into it and things of that sort. But I do think it's I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay. I think we're going to have to embrace it. We can say all we want to, the church isn't a building. Well, I'm to stand by that, because we're not a building. We are a people called from God, and come together with God. And man, we can do that in a lot of really unique ways. So even think about this. So if I go to church, I see a few people, and I leave. But online, I'm going, we're chatting afterwards. Maybe we have a Facebook group that we can talk. I think you might actually see even more community online than you do on a Sunday.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think, there's a lot of opportunities that come with all those difficulties, right?
Yeah.
So going back to the staffing thing, I know that's kind of your role at Vanderbloemen now is, so one thing that you mentioned at the conference is that, a long time ago, if you wanted a job with quote unquote purpose, right? A lot of us want a job that it aligns with our passions. It's something, whether it's faith or, whatever we're really passionate about. For a long time, it was kind of like, you're working in a factory, or you're a teacher, or you work in a church. But now one thing you mentioned is there's all these other parachurch organizations, or more and more of the like Tom Shoes or Harry's Razors or whatever. There's all these companies who they're selling a product, but they've got this element of social justice or whatever that comes along with it. So that's part of the problem. Maybe it's not a problem, but people have more options for a quote unquote purposeful job, right? Are you seeing that too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it used to be that if you wanted real purpose at the heart of what you did, you work for a church.
Yeah.
Now, I still think that is the number one purpose-driven entity out there, because it's not just save the forest, it's save someone's soul, right?
Right.
So it's there. Now, I do think as the church, and honestly any organization, we do need to consistently remind people of the mission that we're doing, and even more importantly, how they're playing a part. It's all about putting people over product. And so if I'm only talking to you about all the projects you're doing, did you get this done? Did you get this done? And I don't say, hey, you know what, the other day, you put out this video, and I heard of a lady that saw that and is becoming reconciled with her husband.
Yeah.
And that does something to you. You're like, oh, I got to be a part of that. Wow. I want to do more of that. So we definitely need to bring up mission more and connect people to the mission and the role that they're playing into it. But we do have to realize that we need to do more than just mission, because there's a lot of other pieces. We talk about economics, we talk about appreciation, all those types of things.
Yeah. And again, that was kind of the heart of your talk, is if the Great Resignation is real and people are way more open to changing jobs than they used to be, probably, or at least a lot of people are. So one of the things you spent some time talking about is, if you want to avoid that, if you want to keep the great people on your team, here's some things that you as a leader should be doing. So people listening, we've got, senior pastors, creative directors, we've got volunteer lay leaders, we've got a lot of different kinds of people listening. But if they're leading a team and they kind of want to avoid this potential resignation or burnout, what are some things that you think we can start doing a little bit better?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to realize and think about yourself. Even you want to be seen.
Yeah.
You want to do the work, and you want people to recognize that. So to me, it's replacing the great resignation with a great recognition, and recognizing again those things that people are doing. And this is not saying, "Hey, good job," because when I say good job, you know what I'm focusing on? The job that you did.
Yeah.
Instead, it's, "Hey, when you did this, this happened. Thank you for being a part of that."
Yeah.
Now you're not just working for the mission, you are a part of the mission. And without you, we couldn't do that mission.
Yeah.
And that will go such lengths. I also think it's also about hiring the right people to do the right things, and then letting them do it.
Yeah.
Don't hire someone to tell them what to do. Hire someone for them to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
And it's and making sure that people are in the right seat. We just had a conversation about, hey, what if we did this and what if we did that, and making sure everyone's aligned with their calling, with their purpose, with the gifting that God has put inside of you, and equipping them to be able to really carry out what God's called them to do.
Yeah. I love that, because when you talked about kind of that pyramid that we always see in business structures, right, where the leader's at the top and all the people underneath them, but you were talking about at the conference how it's important to really flip that, and like what you just said, hire someone who's really good at what you need them to do, and then let them do it. Like, get out of the way. I think you used the football end zone analogy. So I think that's such an important idea. Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So it's all about, as the leader, you're going to give them, and this is an idea that comes from William Vanderbloemen, of, hey, I know where the end zone is. I don't know how to get there. So, hey, team, help us get there. And it's really, and then equipping them to get there, and being very clear what that end zone looks like and what the expectations are and things of that sort. But I think we need to we're not here barking orders. We're under them, supporting, lifting. Now, I do think there are times that we do need to flip that, because I do believe as a leader, it's also your job to cover your team, protect your team, watch over your team. So there are times that you're doing that, but that's not from a leadership. That's you flip it to be the servant of your team.
Yeah, I love that. So it's obviously important for you to, like you said, just get out of the way, let them do the job that we hired them for. Recognition is obviously super important. I don't know. Are you one of those, like, the 5 love languages guys? Like, are you kind of looking out for all those different things, or other than recognition, what are some other things that we can do to kind of help motivate our teams?
Yeah, I think just getting to know them. In my one-on-ones, I'm talking to my team about, one of my team members just got married. So, hey, how's that going? Tell me the story. Oh, I noticed you did this, and talk to me about this. I have one that's just went to see some family. They'll talk that personal connection to say, hey, I see you. And it's a very human to human relationship, and then also being vulnerable, like, hey, here's something about me that you might not know about, or talking about my life and things of that sort. I mean, you don't have to be an open book. I get that there's boundaries and things of that sort, but by getting to know people on a personal level, now they're connected. I'm not saying that your staff is family, but it should also be more than just staff, right? It's kind of that hybrid of, hey, we're together. I enjoy you. You care about me. You recognize, that I just got married, or that my boyfriend just had a concert, or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because now, again, you see me, and people want to be seen.
Yeah. And I think that helps with the in-office dynamics too, right? Like, if we're kind of fighting the shift to, oh, it's so much easier to stay home. But if you have those kind of relationships in the office, it kind of helps build staff culture that way too, right?
Yeah, I think there's reasons now that I want to come into the office, because we're doing things. I mean, we'll do what we call culture events, so we'll just have cookies, we'll hang out, whatever kind of thing. We'll play a game together. I did something stupid the other day. Have everyone, you're going to count to 20, okay? One person at a time. You're going to get 30 seconds to do it. But if someone says the number at the same time, then you got to start all over. Just a dumb, easy game. It was fun. We laughed together. We had a good time together. And then we go into our staff meeting and things of that sort. It's harder to do that on a Zoom call. I'm a pretty big hybrid fan. But man, if you're never seeing each other in person, I think there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, I think you're so right. One of these kind of awkward things with church staffs always come up. The financial side is always hard, right? So you can have a great staff culture where you play games like that, you give them breaks, have snacks in the break room, whatever. there's a lot of that. Like that's important, right? Like I don't want to downplay that. Actually, I think that's maybe more important than being paid really, really well sometimes.
Right.
But it's also true. Finances is just always a sticky part of this, right? So, and churches maybe feel like they don't have the budget to hire the best people, or maybe COVID was kind of rough and things are getting tight. Can you just talk about the financial side of things and how can we work through that to try to keep our best people?
Yeah, I mean, I get that we don't. It's a hard one to talk about because it's just money, and money is a real thing. But I mean, forget just the reality that people need to get paid. The Bible tells us to do so.
Yeah, right.
And it's not too many times. It's like, hey, we can't pay you that well, but this is for the Lord. But the Bible's like, don't say that. This is not a gift. This is give the oxen what they, let them feed, let them do their thing. But I also think sometimes churches just don't know. They don't know what people should get paid. Even especially in the creative world, right?
Yeah.
Youth pastors, they kind of probably have a decent range. But some of the areas they don't. And even youth pastors, they may not. Even children's pastors, they may not. That's why Vanderbilt has a whole compensation report. It's, I don't know, a couple $100 for 5 of them or something like that, but it gives you a nice range. Now listen, you don't need to be on this side of the range. I get that. You don't need to be at the highest, but if this is the lowest and you're way over here, it's not fair. And that's going to hurt people. I mean, and so now they're worrying about, can I do this? Can I pay this? And then we're like, hey, you got to make sure you take vacation. I can't take vacation. You don't pay me to take vacation. I can't go anywhere. And that's pressing. And, so we need to take good care of our people. There's just, it's just reality of the world that we do live in. Yes, maybe you're not going to get paid as much as if you work at an executive level, whatever. But it shouldn't be crazy different, and it should be balanced across the entire staff. If one person's driving a Bentley and I got to ride a bicycle to work, that's the problem.
Yeah. Yep. Well, one really practical thing you liked, which I think is a really interesting idea. I hope if you don't mind sharing again, you said something at the conference. If someone on your team leaves, maybe think twice before you just straight up replace that person exactly with the exact same job description. Can you talk about that? I think it's really important.
Yeah, use that as an opportunity to go, okay, do we need to replace that person, that role? Or what if we didn't replace that, but now we gave raises to the other 3 people that are left and elevated them so that they can now do more? So, I mean, that might mean that they don't have to have a second job or a side gig or whatever. Or that could just be like, oh, thank you. Now I don't have to worry about, those bills so much, and I can focus a little bit more on work. So it's, but it can also be like, what if we didn't do that role and instead we did this role? I mean, it's, again, don't just fill roles, look at everything that you're trying to accomplish and go, okay, how can we accomplish that the best? Is it the smartest thing to have this person here and this person here? Or should we, if this person leaves, boy, that gives us an opportunity to now dream and maybe recreate some things to help us create our mission even better.
Yep. Yeah, I love that idea, because I think you're right. Like our default is, okay, this person's gone, let's find someone as close to that or hopefully a little bit better or whatever. But sometimes, you're right, that you can split the work and everybody gets paid a little bit more, and maybe your team even is a little bit more efficient because there's one less person in the mix. So I love that idea. So people are shaking things up in their teams for whatever reason right now. Another interesting thing that you said at the conference was this idea about some pizzas. Can you explain this whole thing?
Yeah, so there's the whole Jeff Bezos says if you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, you got too big of a team. So I think sometimes, again, it kind of comes to this, hey, what if, and maybe the church can't do 2 pizza teams. Maybe they need to do 1 pizza teams.
Okay.
Now,
I eat a lot of pizza, Michael. Like I could down a box by myself if I'm not careful. But I get the idea.
Think Chicago pizza. We think Chicago pizza.
Okay, all right, there you go.
Does the trick, right? And now that might mean that the church can't do everything they're doing right now.
Yeah.
But I would suggest maybe you don't have to do everything you're doing right now. I think too many churches, too many organizations try to do everything instead of doing what they're great at or even what they're called to do. Life Church is a perfect example. They don't do a lot of stuff, right? But what they do, they nail it.
Yeah.
So they can do the 2 pizza teams because they have smaller teams that are very focused and staying on track. So I think we can look at, okay, what can we do to be there's some efficiencies, but also just what are we the best at? What are we called to do? And let's go all in on those things to allow us to now maybe have smaller teams. So maybe, again, I'm not going to rehire that person. So maybe our staff is a little smaller, but we can do some more things with it. And maybe some things are staffed and maybe some things are outsourced, kind of like you and I were talking earlier. Maybe you can't hire this full-time person, but boy, what if you can contract a fractional portion of that? So I think there's a lot of options you have there.
I think that helps with morale too, right? Like if you're currently doing 50 things and half of them honestly aren't that great, but if you can focus your effort and then you see like, wow, we're really good at this. I think that kind of helps build the momentum there too. So,
well, I mean, if you're going to work 8-10 hours a day, why spend 6-7 of those doing stuff that you're just not the best at? Don't enjoy as much. There's things I'm going to do every day that aren't my favorite. And if I'm spending most of my time over there, that's no way to live, right? I mean, our job is our calling and things of that sort, but I think we need to make sure we have a balance there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of balance, one of the next questions I have was you mentioned the whole side gig, side hustle. These days, it seems like everybody's got their job and then they've also got this other job, right? So I'd like to just hear your thoughts on that. Like, I've heard some people say like, oh, it'd be better if my employees didn't have a side hustle because then they can kind of focus all their energy on that job. They're not as tired or creatively worn out or whatever. But then I've also heard people say like, it's good to have a second thing. Just you can further hone your skills. You can kind of divert your attention into something different. And there's kind of some good balance that can happen when you've kind of got two things going. So what's your take on side gigs, both as a boss and as an employee? What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, how I've always been, if I'm working full time, that's going to be my number one priority as far as my career goes. And I may have other things that I'm doing. Maybe I'm working on a logo, maybe I'm coaching a creative team, but that can never be over here. You got to make sure you're balancing it and not taking on more than you can take on and still do your job well, because we're doing our job unto God, not unto man. So I think it's important to make sure you're balanced that. And it's going to depend on who you are. Not everybody can do that. It's not good for everybody. Because here's the thing too, we can't make our life about our work, right? We have things that are so much more important to that. So if you're working 8-10 hours full time and then 4 more, that's not good for you. But some people, that's the best thing in the world for them. Like if they're not going, and maybe they don't have family, things like that sort. But I think it can be a good thing, but I think you've got to watch it. And I think you have to make sure you prioritize and honor your full-time job as your full-time job. That's really, it's paying your bills, right? It's giving you that covering. And if at some point God releases you from that and maybe your side gig becomes your full, that's fine too. But allow that to happen in a way that's very honoring.
Yeah, that's good. That's important. And a lot of times in these conversations, we spend a lot of time talking about what the boss or the leader can do better, right? How to lead a better team or whatever. But kind of on the flip side, it's also important for us to be good employees, right? Like if we're not in the leader chair, maybe we're number 2, 3, 4, wherever we are on the chart, it's maybe equally as important for us to be good employees. What about that side of things? If we spend a lot of time on the other side, how can we just be good employees?
It's funny. I think so many times when you're lower down, if you will, on the food chart, you look at your leader as having it all together, got it all figured out. Man, they're hustling too. They're trying to figure it out too. And just as much as you're making some things up and trying some new things, like so are they. And so they need your support. They hired you for a reason. And that's not just for a skill set, though it's certainly for a skill set, but they want you to partner with them to accomplish the task that's at hand. And just hit that mission. And so it's also kind of just that reverse. As much as I want to be seen, make sure we're seeing them like, hey, the other day you did this, that was cool. And here's how that made me feel. And that goes like, oh, I remember my dad used to own a computer company. And he would throw a Christmas party, right? And you know what was really hard for him? When people wouldn't send a thank you card or say thank you. But man, when they did, made such a difference to him. He's like, they see that they do value that did make them happy. I'm really glad I did that. And that will cause them to do more of those things, right?
Right.
So, there's a little benefit in there for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's good just to have that holistic picture, right? We want to be a good boss and a good employee and help everybody grow wherever they are.
Yeah, we're a team.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, speaking of teams, so if someone listening's in a spot where maybe someone left or maybe they're considering leaving, and I'm sure you've got a lot of experience with this. If you're looking to hire a new person, what are some of the things that maybe we're not typically looking at that may kind of help a good person stand out? Does that make sense? So if we're hiring someone, if we're in the process, what are just some things to keep in mind to really make sure we get the right person?
I think obviously there's a skill set, there's a resume, great. But there's so much more that's important. Matter of fact, I would say what's not on the resume is more important than what's on the resume. William is working on some concepts of all the soft skills that it requires that makes you that top level employee. So, and what to be looking for and things of that sort. And it's about that relationship, personality. Do I want to spend the majority of my week with this person?
Right.
Is there good culture there? Is there a good relationship there? And understanding what your values are as an organization and see how that measures up with that person. Because if you value, one of ours is contagious fun, but this person's kind of straight and narrow, kind of not really exciting, they may not fit as well. Now, do you have to be 100% at every single value that you have? No, maybe not. Maybe I'm not as fun, but I am ridiculously responsive. That's one of our big core values here, being just on the spot. And if you text me, I'm going to text you right back, all that kind of stuff. But making sure that those values line up with who that person is. I mean, even part of when we hire people, sometimes we'll do the little test of that sort. I'll get a text of, hey, I remember I got a text, hey, going to grab coffee in the morning. What's your favorite kind? And I replied right away, and like, yep, he's responsive, and that made a difference. So see what your values are as an organization, and make sure that they match up. That is going to be critical, because I have hired for skill before. It doesn't go well. You have to hire on the person.
I think that's what most of the gurus out there will say, right? Is hire based on values. But I imagine if you're in, especially if it's a senior pastor or head worship leader, head student ministry pastor, if you've got a kind of a rock star speaker who doesn't necessarily fit in, it's got to be really hard to say no to the rock star and maybe go with the person who's not quite as good. But it pays out, right? Like you say that you've seen that, and that you always pick values over skill set.
It does. But it also takes longer. It's just it's why Vanderbloemen exists, because it's not easy. It's really hard finding the right people. We spend a ton of time in the very beginning of any search, getting to know the church and their DNA. And then the same amount of time on employees, candidates, things of that sort, and making sure that those fit. We liken it to heart surgery. I can have the best heart and the best person, but if those tissues don't match up, it's not going to work. So I can have great skill set and a great person, but if they don't match up with the churches, it's just not going to work out. And so, they're the best singer in the world, but they caused division. And so they came in, 2 people left because of that. And then that person left anyway. Well, now you're down 3 people.
Right.
You have a senior pastor of all things, right? Where the senior pastor goes, the rest of it. So if they're the best speaker in the world, but they don't know how to lead, that's going to cause a really, really big problem. Now, there's things that they can do. There can be organizations that, they're the communicator, but here's this person that's going to lead. I've seen that too. So there's definitely lots of different ways to get around it. But you have to be real about it. And if you're going to do those things, you have to make sure there's some processes and structures involved. That's why we spend a lot of time consulting. Let's look at your org chart and maybe shift some things around to go, maybe that doesn't make sense for you because of those people, personalities, giftings, things of that sort.
Yeah, cool. That's great. So we're kind of beginning to wrap up here. We started our conversation talking about how teams really need to be whole to operate at their best, right? And so let's say one thing we haven't really hit on yet. I don't really know if this is something that Vanderbloemen kind of specializes in or not, but if a change needs to be made, either you decide it's time that you need to leave, or maybe you're on a leadership team and you're like, you know what, this person's just not working out. How can we handle transitions well? Maybe from both sides. If you have to maybe let somebody go or make a hard change, or if you just realize it's time for you to go, how can we make transitions as smooth as possible?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on that. I think we've got succession. The next book that William wrote, all about succession.
Okay.
And a lot of times we focus on succession for the senior pastor, but that should be going everywhere, right? Yeah. So it's about the person going out and the people coming in. So making sure that person going out is being set up well. Do they, what are they going to do next financially? All those types of pieces, because especially as a senior pastor, that's a lot of their identity. And if they're not going to be a senior pastor anymore, let's help them see what their future looks like and set up success for the person coming in, so that there's a smooth transition and there's not friction and there's not fracture coming from that. So that's it's a huge piece. We have tons of articles on our website about succession. We're writing about it all the time on our newsletter, because it's a big deal, and we're really seeing a lot more of it. I think part of it's just because of ages, right? So the church's leaderships are getting older, and so we just helped Rick Warren with some of the back end stuff of their succession. That's a big deal. So making sure you have the right people, and we help with some background checks and things of that sort to make sure that there's a good fit there. That's important, because it's important to make sure that person, whoever, senior pastor, exec pastor, youth pastor, they go to their next spot well, but making sure that other person's got a good foundation to be able to stand on.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, we seem to be in a season where it seems like maybe I'm just naive, but it seems like a lot of lead pastors are kind of aging out at the same time, which is kind of weird. Like there's a lot of people right now, a lot of churches are going through a lot of transitions. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I didn't notice it until I was here, of how it caught them off guard.
Right.
Did you miss it? You just had your 70th birthday,
Right.
Like,
I'm old.
I talked about this, right?
Right.
But I also think sometimes you thought, well, I'm going to leave and he's going to come in, and then you're like, what do you mean you don't want to come in? Like, no, I don't want to be a senior pastor. I'm happy being a whatever.
Yep.
You're like, oh, well, that's the problem. Right. So I think it's a lot of just making sure you're clear and making sure you have a plan. You can even go, if you go to Vander Blumen, there's even a succession calculator. Say, are we ready for succession? And it'll actually give you a score. Kind of fun. Cool. And say, okay, have you had this conversation? Have you had this conversation? Do you have this plan? And it just, that even just alone, completely free, can help you map some stuff out. You know what? We haven't had that conversation. And you need to be having the conversation, not a year before, but several years before. Like, hey, let's, your executive team or your board or whatever your oversight is, needs to be having these conversations to go, okay, because we want to make sure you're headed in the right direction and we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. I love that. It's so important. Okay, Michael, our time went fast. We need to start wrapping up here. Yeah. So again, Great Resignation. It's a very real thing. People are shifting and leaving and starting new things, probably a lot more than, and at least in recent history. Yeah. Everyone wants to be part of a great team, right? And so obviously sometimes it's hard, but maybe we can make slight changes to pay people better. I think that's really important. We can also, as leaders, do our best to encourage and show respect and compliment people when they do a good job. Do little silly things to be fun. As we wrap up, what haven't we hit yet? What else can we do just to make our teams just a little bit better and try to avoid some of the resignation stuff?
I really think at the heart of it all is putting people first. It's something I had to go through. Yeah. So when I got saved, I started going to the church, and I was frustrated about how terrible the communication of this amazing, life-changing story and truth was to me. And so I got mad about it. And God finally said, shut up and just change it, do something about it. Yeah. And so I finally did. And so that's how I started Holy Cow and did all that, which was great. But then when I joined, one of my clients was Victory Church up in Atlanta, great church. But when I came in, I was still that mindset of, all right, I'm going to fix all the things that are wrong here. And there's plenty of things that I saw, right? This needs to be different, that needs, whatever. Yep. I had to go through a heart change of I was all about the product. I was about what we were doing, and I had to shift that and put people first. Yeah. And honestly, because I had to do that shift, it was hard, and there were some relational things that had to be healed, still are healing, all that kind of thing. You have to put people first. Yeah, the product is important. Yeah, what we're doing is important. But at the end of the day, we're called to reach people, and we're not just called to reach the lost. We're called to reach the lost, but we're
Mhm.
also called to love one another. I mean,
Yeah.
think about that. He said, love your neighbor. So
Mhm.
that's your staff person.
Yeah.
That's the neighbor.
Yep.
That's certainly the lost. But if we're not leading with love and kindness and empathy, we're going to miss it. We're just
Yeah.
going to miss it as Christians.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. And I love the whole idea of, instead of great resignation, let's do the great recognition.
Right.
And one thing you talked about is you need to know your team, right? Some people may not want to be recognized in front of the whole church, but they might want to be recognized by a pack. Like for them, maybe it's a pack of Skittles, and that's all they needed, and they're ready to go for another month because you spent 50 cents at the gas station on the way to work. So knowing your team, knowing what motivates them, and then getting that recognition to avoid the resignation, I think it's awesome.
It's true.
Okay, Michael, you've been awesome. If people want to learn more about you or Vanderbloemen, Vanderbloemen is kind of hard to spell. We'll put it in the show notes so people can find it. But
if you Google Vanderbloemen, Google finds it.
Okay.
And I'm michaelbuckingham.com. You can find me, and happy to chat.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for your time. Love the mission at Vanderbloemen. You're doing a great job there. Thank you so much for being generous with your time. It's been great getting to know you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.